Right.
Okay. On to the next. There was a resolve conflicts in open space requirements between the zoning regulations and the development standards. Clarify how open space is calculated. I guess that this has to do, the reason why it's in water policy, there's some examples given about how open space is calculated and how that relates to recharge. Okay. The next include requirements for groundwater impact analysis in the approval process for PD type projects. You want to include PD type and include language wherever appropriate.
We just tell her to do the search and find.
Search and find.
Find and replace all.
This, there's something in what I think is the administrative section that talks about the map and text amendment standards. Strengthen the language there to include recharge of groundwater. Okay. Add site parameters to the description for this section to strengthen it, including the 4 site parameters in terms and conditions. And that looks like it picks up on page 51.
Hey, Church, you mean the 3 and an extra 3, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Three's listed twice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You ready? And to move on,
Is it that step?
let's go to the next. Allow creative form-based design on 15% or greater slopes in a way that preserves and protects the environment. Okay? Are you ready to move to the next? This is policy 5.6. Let's see where we are. Developers encouraged to plant traditional plants native plants. First recommendation is for public education about native plants. The second,
Is that a recommendation to the zoning board though, or is that more of a put at the bottom type recommendation? Yeah, I would change
You want to
this.
pull that out?
Yeah, because I don't think that's a,
maybe not in green, but in white, and maybe
yeah.
a note to carry. This is a
To overall recommendations?
yeah. But and take the green off if you will. Okay. Well, that'll get our attention. Okay, this the next calls for adding utilizing native plants to this section. And then there is some comment ending up on language of a locally adapted nature, including indigenous and drought-tolerant plants. On to the next, include encouraging a planting native plant materials. I guess it's plant in the general development standards, the purpose. And then the next, require native plant materials be replaced with the same. Guess that's where native plants die.
I think in some cases you can replace native plant material with better plant material.
Better.
With equivalent or better plant
Equivalent.
something.
Does that change? I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, in the
No, the next
one, require native plant
More better.
with the same or better native plant materials?
But what is- what's
Same
better?
native
Or more
plant materials
drop-off?
or better? I guess you're on the question of what's same.
Right.
If a certain type
Oh,
of.
it's
Better,
better.
Good example would be if you replace kudzu, you might not want to replace it with
Right.
kudzu.
That feels good.
And then the last recommendation here calls for a list of native plants, and a number of jurisdictions that are encouraging native do have a list. Okay? No.
Tell you what, I could do here.
Well,
That was kind of
That's
side.
that's the, okay, on to the next recommendation, 5.7. This is encouraging natural and man-made rainwater retention. First, include language to encourage this policy. The second, allow greater density than 0.73 units per acre to allow for the opportunity for the devices in this policy to be implemented.
Good.
Are we ready to move beyond that one? I think there's a little meeting fatigue. Please settle a bit. That's 5.9, encourage water saving devices. I think we may be sort of going back over territory that's covered in that first recommendation about innovative, but this is
There's no recommendation.
You skip
no recommendations. And on to 10,
5.8, you just skip one.
yeah, 5.8.
Did I skip?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
5.8.
Oh, right, this one, yeah.
You're in the firehouse and you skip there.
What? Oh, okay.
It's about firefighting capabilities. Include language supporting them. Okay. Ready to go to 5, nothing in 5.9?
Doesn't matter to me.
Okay. And on to 5,
Let's,
Yeah, real quick on that, firefighting
Back
thing.
to
I
5.8.
I spoke to a firefighter about this today, actually, and another thing that will be useful, not only is access to water sources for them to like draft off of, but is to create neighborhood patterns that allow those trucks to get moved around. Because they're coming in, if they're fighting big fires, they're gonna come in with tanker trucks of water. And they're gonna have to then run back to water sources to get more water to come in. And so if you got them on a cul-de-sac or some kind of narrow street or something like that, something that doesn't necessarily circulate very well, then you're gonna have a truck that's trying to get turned around and two more coming in behind it, and it's just gonna be kind of a cluster if the neighborhood connectivity is not.
is that addressed in any other areas?
Yeah.
That's a bad one.
I mean,
Like
Chris has
on
said that
streets.
multiple times,
Yeah.
neighborhoods, he can't even get his truck
Yeah.
I feel
in.
like we talked about
They can't
widths a little bit.
So,
Do you have language
requiring
you'd like to
access to
add?
water points and, consideration for street connectivity.
Circulation,
Traffic.
safe circulation.
Yeah, so something like that anyway. I was talking to him about that day and that
Okay.
would be something to consider for
Okay.
them. I know they'd appreciate it. And you will too.
Consideration.
Oh, right, yeah.
Consideration. Street connectivity facilitating circulation. Okay.
Little
Is that,
wordy,
that's a, ready to move? Is that comfortable with that? Let's go on to the next.
We're adopting these next week, right? So,
Well, they're,
Potentially tonight.
If we get to
tonight's meeting, it would be for provisional
okay.
approval to be re-reviewed next week.
So the
This,
next one addressed, that we just went over, 5.9, addressed the low flow, but it is only encouraged, correct? It's not a policy?
Is
that even, I mean, is that even local government? Can local government even
Yeah, we
regulate
can
that?
tell you what kind of water.
Well, it's
shower head.
visionary in a sense. I don't know if we can.
Well, it's something that they use that technology, they got the benefit,
Quality
right?
builders encourage
Like
it.
where my family lives in California, where they're in year 8 of a 7-year drought, I think all new building is super low. The toilets are different, and
2 options for, yeah.
so I mean, maybe we could put in there a comment like we had before, that we ask the town to investigate ways to do this. We don't have to make it a policy, but we could.
David, is that stuff like 2 times as much as a regular one, or is it 3 times as much? If like the cost of these fixtures, I mean, is it?
I'm not sure, I don't think they're that much.
Okay. So if it's
And is it not required here? It's just encouraged? And how
But
do
I
we
think they're
encourage
like
it?
1 gallon, or some of these real low ones, 1 gallon. Yeah.
Like a lot of the commercial uses, in my opinion, should go even with the waterless urine like that. We have in that farm, just a little bit of maintenance and a little bit of water. It's incredible the flows that cut down. So one more quick idea too, and the state right now has, allows for 49 homes to be on one well, a community well. In my neighborhood, the only neighborhood I've built here, that just didn't work. And it didn't work for 2 reasons. One, we had huge lots. We averaged about 1.678 acre lots. It was a big open hayfield. Everybody in there irrigated that amount, and we irrigated the open space. And the first year it was beautiful. And we have massive problems with lack of water. So in my personal opinion, the state should modify that to say that you can put 49 on one well if you're not irrigating 2 acres, because it just didn't work. But one thing we didn't do before everybody started drilling wells. So it defeated the whole purpose of conserving and doing a community well, because everybody else ended up with a well to irrigate with. So if we had that to do over again, I'd love to see our neighborhood take an alternating day, even addresses and odd addresses, and varying different times during the day, and make sure that the watering was done. And
Well, we did that in his farms.
supersize the holding tank, because it was really more of a storage problem than it was a well production problem.
I wonder if we can handle that with some language that makes HOAs write that into their
No, but it's a
ordinance.
state building requirement that you'll get approval for it if it's so many gallons per minute per,
Right,
and it's like
it's not much.
4.47 or something like that. It's nothing.
And it has absolutely nothing to do, they just completely left demand out of the formula, so.
Well, the formula was to take a shower in your house. It's not irrigating your.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's California's huge problem, is that people irrigating lawns like crazy. And
I'm sort of typing as you're going up. You guys want to look at what?
This would ask for the call for an investigation of ways to incentivize incorporating water-saving technologies.
So I lived in New Mexico for 6 years. We got 8 inches of rain a year. And we used to have xeriscaping, and that's where, and you were encouraged to do xeriscaping, of rocks and yuccas and those type plants. And you had a tiny little patch this big that you'd water occasionally for the dogs.
My cousin lives in Arizona, they got fake grass out there, so that's
Yeah, we didn't have fake grass where we were in Arizona.
yeah.
Read move to 5.10. Town shall favor 2 types of domestic sewage, treatment dispersal, individual and cluster or decentralized wastewater systems. This calls for, first recommendation, incorporating language into the appropriate sections. Second, strengthening the language in the general development standards to pick up on the language in those policies. 5.10, 5.11, 5.12. Okay. Ready to move on to reconcile or clarify conflicts between minimum sizes for watershed, health department, and zoning districts. It's a nice technical task that Carrie and others have done. 5.11. This speaks directly to cluster or decentralized, recommend a land use plan.
Oh, we've never heard that one.
To areas that are appropriate for cluster or decentralized.
That was Amber.
Bold and,
Okay.
Kind of shy about that.
Nothing in 512 and apparently nothing in 513.
holy cow.
Wow. Even though this one is water reuse technologies, so that's.
Well, so back to the original discussion we had when we started all of this. Was there anything, and I promised I would bring it up again, was there anything that we saw tonight that, in the water side, that says, hey, we can't go forward right now because we don't have the study? And Scott, you weren't here earlier, but we did talk about how we wish we would have at least the groundwater or a portion of it that could help us with some new data.
Yeah, can Scott give us any update?
We're gonna know a little bit more about that on April 19th. We've got a jurisdictional meeting that we'll learn a little bit more about that from Golder Associates that's doing the groundwater portion of that. It's just we had some conversation with our council about having a separate special call meeting to present just that groundwater study prior to the full rollout of the results of the water feasibility study, and that kind of got changed back to we just have one big rollout, which will now be in May or June, most likely. So
Scott, what are the components of the overall water study? We've got the groundwater study, and then we've got the
overall feasibility of it.
Overall feasibility. The groundwater study, I think, is the most important thing to this committee at this moment in time. And what is the possibility of our at least getting preliminary results on that sooner rather than later?
I can try to find out a little bit more about that. If there are very specific components of that that the committee's most interested in, I might be able to, as far as the executive, or any specific
They could tell
details,
us
or
what
even just
components are in it.
executive
We
summary.
can check off the ones that are most important.
I know the last one we talked with the Timmons group, they were gonna kind of go back and work on their executive summary and some of the details of finishing it up.
And Timmons is doing their
So Timmons is doing the overall feasibility study. They're contracting with Golder Associates for the specific groundwater portion of that.
where does Golder stand on theirs?
And they're pretty far along on it, but haven't quite finished it. Remind me of the schedule. I've got it written.
So I got it right in front of me. So next Wednesday, we have the start of the review of all the recommendations. And then we have the next Tuesday to continue. And then the next Thursday to adopt the report.
So
We had
That
understood
following
when we
Tuesday.
started the process that groundwater study would be finished February, March kind of time frame, and that's why it's
Right.
really kind of came up.
would it, if I could get better information on the groundwater study by the following Tuesday, whatever the Tuesday is after the 19th, so our meeting,
24th.
how helpful to the committee would that be? Is that-
Anything, any new data point would be great. Or any
And
new
how are they approaching the groundwater study? Are they just reviewing old studies and updating them or correlating them?
Definitely updating with new information. It's largely, they would say a desktop study, but it's fairly intense given that description of it. And I don't know, when you hear that term, since Jim's sitting here, what does that mean to you?
They don't go to the field, they don't do anything.
They don't do any borings.
They're sitting in the
Tests.
office doing their review.
Yeah.
What data are they using? How old is the data, 20 years old or 10 years old? Or?
Couldn't find.
Some of it's close to 50 years old, and then some of it might be the well data that we're collecting this year.
What about the accuracy of that's kind of just a general.
The accuracy,
of the soil
and I was gonna wait till the 5-minute period, but I'm gonna tell you something, you're not gonna have a silver bullet that comes through and says you can't or can develop. You know, these are site-specific things that need to be addressed. My recommendation to y'all would be to include a requirement that, or over a certain number of lots, that you require the hydrology study to be done. I mean, you can't apply one paper, whether it's the 97 study, whether it's a study that somebody else did in favor of or against, and apply it across Guilford County or the Piedmont. You can't, because the environment changes so quickly, and each case by case should require some review or study. I know developers don't want to hear that, but in reality,
I'll volunteer, I'll do one.
well, you're one of the few, but it's gonna be expensive to do that. It's gonna add some costs, but it ensures, you know, these people come, we all have professional liability insurance. I mean, we're on the hook. If we say that subdivision's gonna work, our insurance company is standing back there with some coverage, some policy, if we're incompetent when we make those predictions. So that to me, I don't think you're going to all of a sudden, and I'd be surprised, even with this Golder study, to say, we're relieved, we can do high density everywhere. But you can't do high density everywhere. What you're trying to do is you're trying to apply a number. People like to hang on to a number, but you can't apply that number across the field.
And I'll piggyback off of that in terms of, so we got, this study is Guilford County and the 3 towns, so 4 jurisdictions. And there have been even, you know, when we got into the study months ago, we were talking about, we may come together as a group and decide to go deeper and actually do more field work and engage Golder or someone else to do further work as a result of this study. But, you know, that's just been talked about, kind of waiting until we get the results of this study and see where to go from there.
I remember years ago, in the late 90s, there was a issue about southeast Guilford County that had severe water shortage and so forth, and everybody kind of went berserk, and then they found that there was a commercial user that was pumping over 50 times the highest.
That was actually High Point. That was furniture land. They paved like 10 acres.
Is that on Harvey Road?
And they were, well, this situation, the one that's most notorious, they paved a large area, so the recharge there is 0. And then they were pumping out of a well about 10,000 gallons a day to go through the air conditioning system. And then that water was put in the sewer line.
Piped off.
And went to the sewer plant. So there's absolutely no recharge, and they affected surrounding wells. And any hydrologist, anybody that knows anything about the environment was just like, duh.
Yeah.
You did everything to enhance dropping the water to the surrounding water table. So once they understood that, I don't know what the remedy was.
So where could we add,
5.2.
to have
Let's
a
do the-
developers,
Set thresholds for hydrology studies.
and is it over 5 units? What is the threshold for the size?
Dick's gonna figure that out for us.
Okay, we'll have the zoning board figure out the minimum,
Experts.
the minimum requirements to have experts.
Hydrology
What would be
studies.
reasonable?
Well, I would say, I mean, now you've got subdivisions here that are what, 80, 90 lots. I think you would tie it to density.
Yeah,
Not
very rare
just-
we have one that
Not
large.
just the number of houses, but I would tie that to density. If you want to increase density, you might put
You
a
gotta prove
size
why, or how.
threshold. Sir?
You have to prove how through hydrology?
Well, the hydrologist would do a water balance in that area and look at the depth of rock and the recharge rates from the soil types and do those calculations for that specific site. But as far as requiring that, if somebody came in and said, we want to up the density to 2 or 3 units per acre, you know, even if it weren't required, I'd suggest to a developer, you better have a hydrologist look at that to make sure that you're going to have, that we're going to get that water back into the groundwater table.
So you brought up a good point too. What happens if a developer does that and they didn't do the hydrology? The expert come in and do the analysis, and they run out of water. They're kind of egg all over their face as the developer, right?
You have a serious liability, and if you're still in marketing, you have a serious marketing problem. That's why I volunteered to do the hydrology
But-
study, because I don't want to put my name on the deed when somebody could come back that didn't at least start out with certification of having water. So just throwing one more thing out, keep in mind, and I'm an advocate of a water line coming in here, primarily because I've talked to Chris Johnson. I know what it does for our ISO ratings, I know what it does for our insurance premiums, I know what it does. I know that no matter how much water you supply, your soils are only going to take up so much water. That's going to restrict your density, whether you've got a 25-inch water line or a 4-inch water line. You're only going to put as much in the ground as the soil scientist is going to approve, and Guilford County is going to approve is going to go in there. But think about the wisdom of having a water line where you take Forsyth counties or Rockingham counties or Guilford County, or Greensboro's water, bring it into our aquifer without removing any of our potable water, our reserves, and you recharge your aquifer with their water. To me, I've never understood the logic why anybody in this town with the least bit of concern over water would not advocate for an off-site outer basin water to be imported in and then recharge our aquifer with Greensboro or.
Have we looked at that? Have we looked at that?
There's
that a cost
there
issue,
are a
or-
few in this town that are advocating for no water line going. That makes no sense from an ecological standpoint whatsoever.
Can you say with 100% certainty that our recharge area is right here, it's not being recharged up in Rockingham County? I mean, you know exactly where our water is coming from.
So the groundwater, some people think the water under the ground is in some underground river, and that's not true.
Well, it does move.
It moves downhill or towards negative tension, but we don't have, I mean, I work for a guy, he's like, my water comes from Indiana. I was like,
No.
why do you buy it from Indiana? He's like, no, it's an underground river. So there's an actual mound of water under these hills, but it doesn't move. It'll move in a downhill path at atmospheric pressure. Now soils, if I pour water on that table and put a napkin in the edge of it, that water will move into that napkin, even if the napkin's uphill. That napkin has a tension, a negative pressure that it's putting on that water, it's pulling the water up. So when we say water runs downhill, that's not always the case, but in general, our recharge is local. So when we put a well in the ground and we start pumping water out of it, it creates a cone of depression. And then the water goes into that cone of depression and is captured by that cone. And we're going to pump that same water out of that cone of depression. So, no, our recharge area does not come from Rockingham County. It's here.
Discharge,
Okay,
it does flow down.
Nick,
down.
So-
Could you stop snapping that pen, please?
Okay, so back to our task at hand.
There was a suggestion here to require hydrology studies
That's
for
all I do is I click.
developments of certain types with specified
Hydraulic
thresholds.
study, not hydrology, right?
Is it require or look into or
Hydrology
evaluate?
You say
Evaluate?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's add that in.
And evaluate.
Yeah.
Evaluate hydrology study for development, yeah. I think that, because we're asking the zoning board to figure out what the threshold would be.
Exactly.
Well, so it'll be required though when it trips that threshold, so require a hydrology study,
Require and evaluate hydrology.
Required hydrology.
so it will be required when some certain point trips.
Okay, so you wanted to, Bill, go over
Yes.
the final report?
Yeah, very briefly, I spent part of last week and this week beginning the final report. And just to, I think I may have 2 or 3 meetings ago said, here's the outline that I'm envisioning. I'm now in it. The first sections would be an introduction, pretty straightforward. Your charge from the town council, the process that we have followed, you have followed. And that sets the stage for some sections that will have the recommendations. And this is, I'm still looking at what's the best sequence of this, but definitely the collection of recommendations that you have provisionally approved will be included as probably the main body of this final report. We have edited them to remove much of what's on the left, but as you'll see, and Jesse might even be able to pull it up, it has the recommendations that you provisionally recommended, the UDO page and section that it relates to, and then for ease of the zoning board and the public, whoever wants to look at it, each recommendation will have its own number. But the numbering scheme is fairly simple. It relates to policy 1, it's policy 1.1.1, the first recommendation in policy 1.1. So this is sort of what they will look like.
But the appendix or addendum or whatever is going to include everything. It's not going away.
All the spreadsheets that you've been reviewing will be in an appendix, so that if anybody, just for documentary reference in the future, they'll be able to see exactly what was commented and how did it then lead to that recommendation. There will also be, and what I think I'm calling them, broader concerns, broader cross-cutting concerns. You have, in a number of different policies, you brought up certain issues over and over again. And I'm considering 2 or 3 paragraphs from each of those topics that try to capture the sense of the committee. One of them, I think, is that I'm envisioning. One deals with density. Another, I think it would be appropriate to at least document that you did your work anticipating that a water study would be available. You postponed your meeting to your consideration until tonight, but the water study isn't available. There may be a way of, without wallowing in the frustration, saying that whatever consideration, as the UDO is redrafting, the zoning board should consider the best available information that's coming out of that water study, particularly the groundwater section. And there may be 1 or 2 other, you've said over and over again, use the best available science. Use science-based factors and criteria. That cuts across everything that I think you've said. So there'll be a paragraph or 2 for each of those broader concerns. And then there's something that I'm thinking about as being additional recommendations. And you've mentioned a couple of times, and the land use plan is a good example. The zoning board on its own can't create the land use plan. It's a